Welcome! I'm Joey, the mastermind behind Magni Craftworks, a dynamic woodworking enterprise that mainly makes tabletop gaming accessories. When I saw the Scrap Wood Challenge, my creative gears began turning. It's the perfect opportunity to delve into designing innovative prototypes for the latest addition to my collection of tabletop gaming accessories, available at magnicraftworks.com. As I pried open the box, my eyes widened with anticipation as I took in the eclectic mix of materials before me. Although some pieces may have seemed lackluster at first glance, I knew that with a little ingenuity, even the seemingly ordinary scraps that would be usually relegated for the scrap pile could be transformed into something extraordinary. Sorting the pieces into 4 distinctive categories: the cast-off cutoffs, the complete cutting board, the enigmatic glue-ups, and the walnut scraps, I eagerly began coming up with my designs. Though I worked on everything simultaneously, let me walk you through the journey one pile at a time. Let's start with the walnut scraps. I was determined to bring out the best in each piece. I jointed one edge of each scrap and fused 2 pieces together using Titebond 2 wood glue. After the glue had set, I flattened a side and an edge, then joined 2 of those joined pieces together again. This left me with 1 spare piece of walnut, and I started thinking on how I could use it as I continued on. I dove headfirst into Carbide Create, where I designed a circular dish in which you could keep some spare gaming pieces, maybe like wrist pieces or something like that, and then set the CNC to work. To complete these little gaming dishes, I added a charming chamfer to the bottom. Job done, and on to the next piece. Working with the cutoff pieces presented a challenge, but utilizing my brand new Wahuda jointer, I was in awe of the precision and ease it offered compared to my Craftsman. The spiral head cutter made a world of difference. With one edge perfectly jointed, I took each piece to the table saw where I cut a parallel edge. Doubts began to creep in at this point as I began the glue-up process, and I wondered if I would have enough material to continue with my plan. Once the glue had dried, I jointed one side and planed it parallel in the planer. In Carbide Create, I designed an innovative dice vault, complete with an inner lip and 4 magnetic holes on each half. After the CNC cut out the vault, I was left with half the panel and knew I had to put it to good use. I decided to design a unique 3-pocket accessory tray, adding another element of functionality to my collection. But just when I thought things were going smoothly, disaster struck. Now, I typically rely on double-sided tape to secure my material to the surface of the CNC machine, but this time, the tape had lost its grip and left my piece vulnerable. As the router began to carve, the piece ripped away and was left in a state of destruction. While it was disheartening to have to pitch this piece, I knew that it was ultimately my fault, and it had been 2 days since I carved the dice vault and the tape had lost its strength. I should have really replaced it before beginning the carve, but I was lazy and wanted to get on with the project. Now, back to the completed vaults. I decided to go to the router and I chamfered an edge on the outside and added it to the done pile. Now let's talk about the enigmatic glue-ups. These pieces presented a challenge for me as they were not glued parallel to each other. Unfortunately, I lost the footage that showed the close-up of these pieces, but you can kinda see in the before photo how they were misaligned. I decided to use my table saw to separate them, knowing that this would be a more efficient method and save more material compared to just planing them flat. I ripped them down the glue line on my table saw. Again, this is lost footage to time. Once I separated the pieces, I immediately glued them all back together. I threw in 2 pieces that I had originally sorted into the cutoff pile, thinking they would fit in well. After the glue dried, I headed to the bandsaw. Pushing the board through the sharp blade, I felt the resistance of the saw as it made quick work slicing it in half, and then I turned my attention to the planer. It quickly removed the rough bandsaw kerf marks and brought the boards down to a precise 3/8 dimensions required. Back at the table saw to cut the individual pieces, I used 3D printed templates to quickly bring the saw close to the desired dimensions for each cut. However, due to the lack of material, I had to make adjustments to the dice tower pieces, and they ended up coming out a bit thinner or smaller than I would have liked to do on the full production runs. After much deliberation, I finally settled on a half and half design, split straight down the middle, with, cherry on one side and the white oak on the other. With the design in place, I set to work on cutting out the pieces. First, I cut the 4 sides of the dice tray. Each cut was made with precision using the 3D templates that I mentioned before. Next, it was onto the tower. I carefully cut out the 4 sides, being sure to leave ample space for the die to exit through the front. The lower half of the front panel was the same height as the tray walls, while the upper half was slightly larger. I took the remaining material over to the planer and planed it down to a 1/4 inch. This will become the bottom panel of the tray, which I will cut to size on the table saw. I headed over to the drill press, where I used 2 of my 3D printed templates to guide myself, and with steady hand and focused mind, I used the Forstner bit to create 2 pockets for magnets, one for the wall of the tray and one for the lower front of the tower. These magnets will serve to hold the tower and tray together during play, ensuring no dice will go astray. Hey, that kinda rhymed. Next, I cut a dado in the tray walls, making sure that it was big enough to perfectly accept the 1/4 inch panel. With this step complete, I reached for my branding iron. I carefully branded my logo into one of the tray walls and then onto the center of the dice tower. Turning my attention to sanding, I carefully worked my way through each piece up to 220 grit. To assemble the pieces, I reached for the painter's tape and a straight edge, and I aligned each piece with precision. Surprisingly, painter's tape is a powerful tool in woodworking. It is strong enough to hold everything together while the glue cures, but doesn't leave any marks. Plus, you could use the blue tape trick, or in my case, I guess it would be the green tape trick, but I digress. I then flipped the entire assembly over and applied the glue and fitted everything into place. As I looked at the leftover piece of beautiful walnut, a wave of inspiration washed over me. See, I'd been planning to make a spline jig for what felt like ages. I've got this side project for my friend Elwood that I've been meaning to build for what seems like 6 months now, and it needs a spline jig, so I figured now was the perfect opportunity to finally build one. I carefully cut small pieces of the walnut and got to work fashioning a quick and dirty jig out of plywood. It wasn't pretty, but it got the job done. And after letting the glue cure for 3 weeks, I was ready to continue. See, I came down with a pretty nasty respiratory illness that kept me out of the shop for a while, and boy, when I finally returned to the shop, I was more determined than ever to finally finish this challenge. So I carefully placed the splines into their designated slots and reached for the flush cut saw to carefully trim off the excess. Then I sanded it smooth with 220 grit. Now let's talk about that final piece, the complete cutting board. It had a few dings and imperfections in it, and I had an idea to make a one-of-a-kind resin art piece for my friend, who is a huge My Hero Academia fan. To create the design, I went into Carbide Create and meticulously crafted a toolpath for one of his favorite characters. It took hours of work to ensure that every detail was just right. Once the design was perfected, I carefully loaded the cutting board into the CNC machine and let the machine work its magic. Pouring resin can be a very mesmerizing and enjoyable process, but it can also be quite time-consuming. In this case, it took several days to complete as I carefully mixed and poured various colors into place. However, it wasn't just the time spent that was a concern. I had to be careful not to disturb the resin as it cured, which meant I couldn't work on other projects in the shop, so that dust wouldn't get in it and I wouldn't bump it because I'm pretty clumsy. To solve this problem in the future, I plan to build a curing cabinet so that I can continue to work on other projects while resin art dries undisturbed. Once it was fully cured, I planed the piece flat and added a chamfer to the front edge, and then it was on to the sanding and applying finish to everything stage. Everything got sanded up to 220 grit. I'd previously sanded the tower and tray before the glue up because it's easier to do it then, so I only had to sand away any excess glue stains. After sanding the tray, tower, and vault, I installed the magnets for each. For the resin art, you will see me apply only tung oil in this video. For something like this, I would completely finish it with Total Boat Halcyon. This way, the owner doesn't have to worry about coming back and maintaining a piece of art yearly. However, I like to let the tung oil dry for 2 weeks before applying the Total Boat. This way, it doesn't dry up and destroy the Total Boat finish as it continues to cure. Since I took so long off with the respiratory illness, I didn't have the time to apply the final finish before submitting this. Just know that as you're watching this, I probably applied some Total Boat to this piece. Everything else got finished with my homemade finish, Bela's board butter. Bela's board butter is made with beeswax, safflower oil, mineral oil, hemp oil, tung oil, and pine rosin. It brings out the natural color of wood and leaves a smooth, protective finish. Bela's board butter is food safe and can be purchased at magniescraftworks.com. While you can just apply the board butter without heating it up, I like to melt the wax for these initial coats. I don't have any data to back up my findings, but I feel like I get a better finish when I apply these first coats with the wax fully melted. For those of you at home, you can melt the wax if you want to, but do so at your own risk. If you're using a flame, it can spread and get everywhere, so I don't really recommend it. It isn't necessary, I just like to do it this way. For the first coat, I apply a heavy coat and rub it into the wood. I'll let it sit for an hour before wiping away the excess and applying a second coat. After an hour, I will wipe away the excess and let it sit for 24 hours before wiping it down with one final time. At this point, the oils and wax have penetrated into the wood deep enough to provide a beautiful protective finish. For maintenance coats, you only need to apply one coat. Well, that's it. Everything done. I'll leave you with some beauty shots of everything so that you can admire my handiwork. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos. Funnily enough, even though this video isn't shot very well, I'm actually a cinematographer at my day job, so I promise I will get better at this if there's interest. Yeah. You can follow me on Instagram at magniecraftworks, or on Facebook at magniecraftworks. I hope to see everyone again later. Bye-bye.